If you've ever wished you had a podcasting pro with nearly a decade of experience whispering growth secrets into your ear, that's exactly what you'll get when you tune into Podcast Growth Tools with me, your host, Kylie Chandler. This is the ultimate show for you if you're ready to grow your podcast audience, skyrocket engagement, and turn your show into a traffic-driving, list-building powerhouse. I've been in the podcasting world since 2015, helping creators like Amy Porterfield grow their shows to over 1 million downloads a month. My superpower? Breaking down proven podcast strategies and marketing techniques into step-by-step guidance you can actually implement without fluff, overwhelm, or guesswork. On this show, we're getting real about what actually moves the needle when it comes to growing your podcast audience and using it to boost your email list growth. From actionable insights and expert interviews to behind-the-scenes secrets, I'll help you turn your podcast into a traffic-driving, list-growing machine. Grab your earbuds, hit subscribe, and let's take your podcast to the next level. Hey friend, let's talk about the numbers that actually matter when it comes to podcast growth. Like we're really talking about true podcast marketing, podcast growth. Because here's the thing, downloads were cool. They were, but they aren't anymore because they don't tell the whole story, right? And we want to understand as marketers, as entrepreneurs who are pouring time, energy, resources into our podcast, we want to know and understand what's actually moving the needle. So, you can have 10,000 downloads a month and still not convert a single listener into a subscriber, community member, or a customer. But what does that leave your podcast doing for you and your business, right? So in this episode, we're going to really go beyond the download count and we're going to talk about what it really means to move the needle, like building a loyal community, creating super fans, boosting engagement, and using your podcast as a strategic growth engine inside of your business. Now, if you're tired of refreshing your download numbers and wondering, like, is this even working in my podcasting correctly? Then this episode is for you. So we are going to break this all down and we're going to talk about other things that you should be thinking about and measuring weekly, consistently to really understand what is working so that you can make educated decisions on what to continue to do to optimize on your time, your energy, your alignment, your workflow, your team, all that good stuff. But before we dive in, I want to tell you about something that I have been working on the back end. So if you have worked with me or if you've listened for a while, you know that I work pretty high ticket one-on-one with clients, consulting and supporting them in these really strategic strategies, these marketing strategies that make the podcast and the email list really soar and rise together and eventually, drive people to your offers. And so really turn podcast listeners into paying customers, turn subscribers into podcast listeners, and just create this really wonderful and strong supportive ecosystem for your marketing and your business, among many other things. And I have been getting a lot of requests to kind of bring that to the masses for people who maybe don't have the time, space, resources, or finances to really work one-on-one with me. So I'm considering putting together a beta course where I would really bring you through putting together these strategies, putting together these funnels within your business, but also learning the ins and outs of creating a highly searchable podcast episodes, highly searchable and ranking SEO ranking show notes, all of the things, how to tap into your existing audience, how to create these amazing newsletters, like all of the juicy details. I'm thinking about actually putting into like a group coaching type program. And so what I would love to know from you is if that's something of interest to you. And if it is, I want you to go to podcastmarketinghub.com/beta, BETA, and drop your email list in the form. And that's going to let me know that you would be interested in joining a group coaching program that will be beta. So what does that mean? It means it's going to be at a lower price point, but I'm going to lean on you to give me really good feedback on what's working. how we can improve it, all that good stuff. And then, of course, report on the growth and the metrics that you see. So it could be really fun. I'm hoping to kick that off soon. So again, head to podcastmarketinghub.com/beta, and you can let me know if that's something of interest to you. And of course, if you're on my newsletter, you'll hear about it then as well. So anyways, thanks so much for being here. Let's dive into the juiciness of this episode. So you've heard me say it once. You'll hear me say it a million times. As we all know, and as we all have come to accept as a society, slightly for the most part, downloads are just a vanity metric, right? Yes, they can give us some insight, but they don't really tell you if people are actually coming back to listen to the podcast consistently, right? Recurring, coming back again and again, which is a great sign of creating super fans, of showing that your content is really serving your audience. It doesn't tell if anyone is actually following your show. It doesn't tell you if they're joining your email list. It doesn't tell you if they're buying your offers and, signing up for your free resources. So instead of obsessing over downloads, shift your focus to impact, because impact does drive conversions. And what do conversions do? Conversions build a business, right? So that is why I am standing on my soapbox. I'm so passionate about this. And I really want you to start to see your podcast as an entire part of your business. It should not be siloed. It should not be dependent on how are my downloads doing only. It needs to be integrated throughout every stage of your business. So let's talk about a few different ways. We're going to talk about metrics that I like to measure, but then also some strategies for how you can start to reframe how you're looking at your podcast and start to feel really good about the things that it's doing for your business. So I do want to first start out with a metric, and that is understanding followers and why they matter more than you think. So every podcast platform has a version of follow or subscribe. And so I personally like to track this on Apple Connect and then Spotify for Creators. They both offer you a look into how many followers you have. And here's the deal. This is why these people are so important. These people have raised their hand and they have said, I want to know every time you publish an episode, because every time you do release an episode, it notifies them. Every time you publish something, it notifies them. So that is as close as we get to retention for a podcast as it gets. That's a warm, engaged audience lead. That's somebody who truly is more likely to convert. And so you want to be following this and tracking this weekly, and you want to see it grow. That's also showing you that you and your episodes are really speaking to people, for them to be able to, again, raise their hand and say, I want to make sure I never miss an episode. I'm always notified. That's a big thing on these platforms. So be sure that you're paying attention to this. So the goal, obviously, isn't just to get a one-time listener, right? It's to get people to follow you, to subscribe, to come back. So calls to action definitely matter, right? We don't want to just say, hey, rate and review. Instead, what you can try to play around with towards, throughout the episode, baked in. A lot of people save this for the very end, but go ahead and try putting it right at the beginning, try and putting it in the middle, try and putting it at the end, and just mention it whenever. Is say, make sure that you follow my show, and that way you won't miss next week's episode about. And then what you can do is mention, like, give them a sneak peek. And especially when you're hitting the content on the head, this is going to be something that is going to resonate with them. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, that sounds so interesting. I am busy. My mind is maxed out. I'm not going to remember to come back and check. So I'm going to go and follow to make sure that I do get notified when Kylie is talking about so-and-so. So for example, let me just give you an absolute example of this. Next week on Podcast Growth Tools, I am actually diving into, we've been talking a lot about downloads. I'm going to share the emotional toll that it takes trying to keep up with downloads, especially if you still think that you are going to get back to your pre-iOS update downloads. It's exhausting. And even before that, it was exhausting, because I have stories for you of how I totally drained my battery checking downloads multiple times per day and what it actually didn't do for the business. So I'm going to talk all about that. One goal I'm having in these episodes is to be a little bit more transparent, a little bit more vulnerable about the stories and the experiences that I've had in the podcasting industry. And so that one is going to be a little bit more of a vulnerable episode. So I hope you'll come and join me. So be sure you're following to get on that list to get notified as soon as that episode drops so you do not miss it. Okay, so this is so meta, right? I just showed you how to use that, but it's true. That is the next episode I'm dropping after this one. And I hope you're going to go follow so that you can really come along with me on that journey where I am being vulnerable. And so far in these episodes, I haven't necessarily been super vulnerable. I've been very strategic and things like that. So if you want to come behind the scenes with me a little bit, I invite you to come on over and follow. All right, let's talk about super fans. So yes, followers are considered super fans, right? But it goes beyond that. Super fans are people who might DM you about their favorite episodes or an episode that really resonated with them. There's somebody who's going to join your newsletter. They're going to take your quiz, jump on any free resources that you offer that you mention. They're going to share your podcast in stories. They're going to show up when you open the doors to any digital type thing that you have. So a digital product, a launch, a membership, a course, anything like that. So how do you create super fans? Well, pretty easy. To be honest, it's by being consistent, delivering real value and making the listener feel seen. So how do we do that? You have to have such an understanding of who is listening to your show. You have to understand their pain points, their desires, their wants, their needs, what words they're using, what words they're searching. Like when we talk about being found, I can't tell you how many times people will say, I'll ask them, how did you find me? I was just searching something on Apple or Spotify and one of your episodes came up because I am so intentional about the keywords that I use in the title, in the description, in my show description, in my show title, and on the topics that I actually talk about. Okay. So if you are not hitting all of those markers, you need to slow down. You need to start being more intentional with every single piece of podcast content that you create because it works. Trust me, it works. And one trap I find people fall into is that they aren't planning their content ahead. So then they figure, oh my gosh, I need to create some content here where we have to release some podcast episodes. And then they just come up with a topic that they think might be top of mind or they think might be a good one because they're feeling it, which sometimes works. Don't get me wrong. But if you don't actually sit down and think about what your audience is asking, wanting, needing, then you're going to miss the mark, right? And then on top of that, if you're not spending time thinking about what the title of that episode should be and how it should drive traffic to that episode to get people to listen, you've got to take the time to do it. All right. So that is here. I'm going to just come down a little bit and I'm getting fired up. It's all good. But anyways, so let's move to the next section. So you've heard me say this before. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, hi, my name is Kylie. I'm obsessed with making sure that podcast listeners become subscribers on our email list, all that good stuff. But if you want your podcast to truly become the real lead generator for your business, you need to move people from just a passive listener to an active subscriber. Let me say that again. You need to move people from being a passive listener to an active subscriber. So what does this mean? This means that we need to really, again, meet them where they're at and give them the content, the resources that say, you need this. Get on my email list, get in my world, let me nurture you. And that's how we create active subscribers. So here's a few more tactical ways of how we're going to do this. Anytime that you need to create a lead magnet in your business, make it a podcast centric lead magnet. Like, don't go and create a ton of new content for your freebies. Just use your podcast episodes. You've created them. You have a bunch. Pull some of your top ones and turn them into a bundle, put them into a quiz, put them into playlists. You could just take that content from the transcript and turn it into a PDF and then still drive people. Hey, if you want to go further on this, go check out the episode. So stop trying to come up with other lead magnets. Literally just use your podcast, repurpose that content. Another way is to do dynamic and baked in ads. So dynamic, as you probably know, is dynamic insertion. So this is fun because A, you can track it. You can consistently exchange things, right? So if you're promoting one thing right now, you can promote it for 2 weeks and then you can take it down and promote something else. This is great for if you're launching a product or a course or something like this. But when you're not actually launching something that is generating revenue, you should be promoting the podcast centric lead magnets we just talked about, right? So if you have this bundle, say you are a doula and you have a podcast all about getting ready for birth naturally and breathing exercises and stuff, maybe you say, hey, by the way, mamas, and this is your dynamic ad. Hey, by the way, mamas, I put together a bundle for you of some of my best breathwork audios, which are just your podcast episodes, basically. Go here to grab them. So now you used your podcast to create a lead magnet, and then you're inserting a dynamic ad that drives people to that lead magnet. So now you're getting those people on your email list. You're deepening that podcast relationship with them. You're helping to create super fans and you're serving them a ton of value. Okay, so let's talk about baked in ads. I did one at the beginning of this episode. If you were following along, I love baked in ads. And you know what? Don't get all worried about, well, if it's baked in, am I going to go have to remove it one day, a year down the road when it doesn't make sense anymore? No, that's not the case at all. If you are driving your listeners to something through a baked in ad and it changes or it's no longer offered or it's closed or something, whatever the case might be, all I recommend you do is change that landing page, redirect whatever landing page you sent them to a different resource that's very similar, or it's some way to get their email address. So maybe, for instance, okay, at the beginning of this episode, let's use this one for an example. I shared that I am working on potentially creating a beta group program and a group coaching program. And I want you to go and let me know if you're interested. And if you are interested, I asked you to go to podcastmarketinghub.com/beta, drop in your email address, and then you will be on my list to contact when I do this beta group coaching program. That was baked in. And guess what? That's probably not going to be relevant in a year. So what am I going to do? I'm probably going to just redirect podcastmarketinghub.com/beta to a podcast playlist bundle or something, or a quiz that I create or something. So it's still, even if they go there, they're still getting a ton of value. You're not just going, doesn't look like that page is live or whatever. you know the page I'm talking about. So that's what I'll say about baked in ads. And also the beautiful thing about baked in ads is they feel so natural and they're less likely to get skipped, right? Because somebody's already listening. You casually mention it. It usually aligns with what you're talking about. And that's why it's baked in. And so it feels really natural and it converts really well. All right. So those are really wonderful ways on how to build an email list full of people who are already trust you and then lead to sales. Another thing that I want to encourage you to focus on is using your podcast to build a really strong community. I mean, your podcast can truly be like the front door to your community. That's truly how I envision it. So I want to give you some tangible ways that you can actually build that real connection and build that community. And one other thing I'll say is I have seen small podcast communities. I've seen massive podcast communities. I mean, I remember when it was very popular for a podcaster to have a free Facebook community. I think Jenna Kutcher still does. And it's a big, big community. And there is power in that, but also there is power in having just a really intimate community who is always showing up for you, always loyal, because guess what? Those are probably going to be people who are going to buy from you over and over and over again. I know on Instagram, people have like private communities within like messaging communities. I think that can be a really beautiful way to build a community if you're more active on Instagram. I think most of us are probably more active on Instagram than Facebook. So that's a cool way. But other than that, I highly recommend that you encourage DMs. So I actually just saw a friend do this. She was on somebody else's podcast and her CTA was like, come and DM me at her Instagram. She said she got 250 people to come and DM her. That's a lot of new people. Where do you send them? You send them when somebody DMs you, you send them to probably one of your playlists that you've created, right? because now you're getting their email and you're driving them to the podcast. So another great way is to ask your email subscribers to reply. And this is a great way to get feedback, to learn what they really want to hear on the podcast, what topics. So sometimes we rack our brains trying to figure out what we should talk about, when we really we can just ask our audience, go ahead and DM me, go ahead and respond back to this email and let me know what you thought of the episode, or if there's any topics that could serve you, things like that. Another interesting approach to this and to really creating a community and also attracting new people is you potentially could create a private podcast. I love Hello Audio. And why this could be beneficial to you is that you could use that to drive new traffic to your existing podcast. So maybe you just create like a 3-part series or something like that, but it's so specific to a certain audience. And then you can run ads to it. You can drive cold traffic to it. And once they check out your, maybe it's like a 3-episode private podcast, they're going to want more. So what do? Then you send them to your full podcast, or you send them to your offers. So things like that. Another really fun way, if you're on Instagram, you can test this out. But I found that if you post a question on a story on Instagram and you ask specifically about an episode, you'll probably get some really great questions and some really great conversation pieces. And it's just a fun, unique way to interact with your clients and your customers and your followers and your podcast listeners. So always be thinking of like, what's a way that I can connect with them? And for people to drop a little comment in those question boxes is really easy. And they like doing it because then, of course, you might feature what they asked and then give them an answer to their question. So always be thinking of, how can I use my connections, my community to create loyalty? And then from there, you'll start to have loyal listeners, and then you'll have a higher lifetime value because, of course, they're in your world. If they purchase, the chances of them purchasing again are so much higher. So you can see how that becomes a whole part of the ecosystem of your business. All right, here's the last one, which honestly, what I'm about to share is very kind of sums up everything we've been talking about. And it's weaving your podcast into the entirety of your business. Again, at the beginning, I talked about how I find so many podcasters have their podcast very siloed in their business. But if you can really start to think about your podcast as like the number one way to create traffic flow, to create new leads, new qualified leads, to repurpose your content and create valuable content, serve your audience. Like if you start to see your podcast as the cornerstone of all of those things I just said, it's going to simplify your business. It's going to change things in your business, right? Because not only will you see your podcast grow, your followers grow, but you'll also start to see that it's so much easier to create content within your business because you're repurposing. You're not running yourself ragged trying to create the next best lead magnet. So, all right. So ways to integrate above everything else we talked about. One, you're going to use episodes to warm people up for your digital offers. This is such an important way. Let the podcast be the bridge for whatever you're selling. I mentioned this, but repurposing your podcast content into everything within your business, your social posts, your lead magnets, your trainings, your everything. Like, how can you just repurpose your content over and over and over again? Because your podcast content is so aligned with everything else in your business. At least it should be if it's serving the right purpose. So it should be really seamless to integrate it into those. And then lastly, use it as nurture content for your email list. So, not only can you use your podcast to get people onto your email list, but then you can nurture them with more podcast content because you know that they are already podcast listeners, right? You captured them through enticing them with podcast content so you can continue to support them with it. Another cool way is to use it throughout your nurture sequences. And one way that works really well is if you have a re-engagement campaign, which I hope that most entrepreneurs do. I usually recommend to do it between like the 75 days and then 120 days. There's kind of like a sequence in there that needs to happen. But honestly, one way to make that re-engagement sequence really strong is to look at your past newsletters. If you are using podcast content as part of your newsletter, and just take your top performing newsletters, like which ones had the highest open rate, which tells us that the subject line was really strong. Use those as part of your re-engagement campaign. Otherwise, you can also use your top performing podcast episodes as part of your re-engagement campaign. So you can put it as like, these are my top resources to XYZ. So obviously map out what it's going to do to them so that they know they have to open up that email to get those resources and then offer them the resources as part of it. So I just always want to reiterate, like, your podcast should truly be working with your business, not separately. It should not be siloed. So let's bring it all back home, right? Downloads are a surface level metric that gained popularity, doesn't really serve us anymore. But when we switch gears, when we switch our mindset and we start thinking about engagement, conversions, loyalty, that's the stuff that turns a podcast into a business asset, which is what I want for you. So if you are ready to go beyond downloads and build something that actually drives growth, start tracking these other metrics, start paying attention to these other metrics, and also start shifting your mindset about some of the other things we talked about and how you view your podcast listeners and your podcast. So again, I'm just going to share with you that, I work one-on-one with clients at a very high level, very one-on-one, hands-on, but I want to bring it a little bit more to more of you. I want to be able to support more of you. Because as you can imagine, doing one-on-one, takes a lot of time. And so I would love to open up a group coaching container soon, and it's going to be beta. So it's going to be, we're learning together, we're exploring together, but it's really the strategies that I do teach one-on-one. And so if that is something of interest to you, please go to podcastmarketinghub.com/beta, drop your email in and let me know. Let me know. That's all you need to do. And then you will be the first to hear about it when it opens. I mean, unless it's absolute crickets over there and nobody goes and does that, then we might not have a beta course. But I have a very strong gut feeling, just given the conversations I've been having, the requests that I've been having, that this is something that could serve a lot of people. So I hope you will be part of that. And thank you so much for being here. Again, like I said, next week, I am getting vulnerable. So if you're not following me, you might miss it. So be sure and check out any platform that you're listening on. Follow. Some are subscribed still. But anyways, so that you can join me next week where I pull back the curtains a little bit. But thank you for being here. I so appreciate you. And of course, if you find that this could be beneficial to one of your podcasting pals, go ahead and send it over. So, all right. Thanks so much.